Well, welcome everybody to our monthly NWSOFA climate change meeting. We have some excellent guests tonight from Sierra Club, Illinois. They're giving us an update on issues they've been working on. Just to let you know, last night I was on, or at least watched a webinar with Indivisible National Climate Group. And there were several people on there that had participated in the Illinois Lobby Day that made some comments. There's also a very active group from a lady from Harlem in New York, and an active group in Portland, Oregon doing stuff, but Illinois was well represented. So I thought maybe you would all like to know about that. And I invited any of those people to come on. I don't know if any of them are showing up tonight, but maybe they will. And with that in mind, let me turn it over momentarily to Bill Davis to talk about NWSOFA-Indivisible and our organization. And I'll turn it back to me when he's done.
Okay, well, we're going to share a couple slides to talk about who we are and what we're doing. First of all, it is the Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action. That's the Northwest Suburbs of Chicago, and we are an indivisible chapter, one of 6,000 across the country. We cover in our area the land beyond O'Hare, which is 6 townships: Elk Grove, Schaumburg, Streamwood, Barrington, Palatine, and Wheeling. That is our primary area. We have 5,000 members plus or minus from that area. And then we have surrounding areas, another 4,000 members that get our emails and engage into our issue teams. Within our primary area, there's 665,000 people, almost 590,000 voters. So it's a big area, and it's huge for us. We have our twin snowflakes. We have 9 issue teams represented on the blue snowflake, and then we have our communications group represented in the light orange snowflake. Going around our issues group, at the very top, we start with Conversation Z. That is dedicated to the youth podcast today, getting youth involved. We have our healthcare reform initiatives with the ACA, going to the right, and then immigration reform, social justice, huge work in those areas these days, women's right with our Stand With Women group, our fiscal and economic platform on a monthly area, our electoral work that we do now, assisting people to get on the ballot and to get elected. Tonight, the next blue area is climate change. Tonight is our climate change issue group, and we'll talk about that in a second. We have our Restore Our Democracy group. We call them ROD. They work on everything from vote by mail to electoral college, etc. They really have been a great addition to our organization. And then we have a gun violence prevention group that has been active. It's one of our first groups throughout the entire time. So that is our 9 issue groups. And those 9 issue groups are managed by our secret sauce. We have 23 volunteer leaders, and everybody is working full time on our issues. Most of our issues have a lead and a co-lead, but they're just a great group. And 16 of those are dealing with our issue teams, and the other 7 are working on our communication side. So it's a great group. Tonight we have our monthly meeting led by Mark Lundholm, who is our climate change lead, and Mark has been bringing us the people who are in the know, bringing the facts so that people can evaluate, listen, and be informed. And with that, Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
So just to give you some past history, last month we had fellow on from Open Lands, giving a presentation as to their region-wide, a very interesting approach to land use, cultural issues, how climate change affects them. It's another interesting organization that you might want to take a look at. And we've had one Mississippi people on. We've had people from Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. We're going to have somebody on from Citizens Utility Board next month to talk to us about what their issues are. But tonight we are privileged to have on Tim Milburn and Peter Gorr from Sierra Club, Illinois. And they're going to talk to us about what happened on Lobby Day yesterday, I guess, what's happening in the state of Illinois. And then they're branching into some national areas too. So without further ado, Tim and Peter, take it away. Thanks for coming on.
First of all, thanks for inviting us tonight. It's good to have the band back together. It's been a while to see all these familiar faces with kind of a common set of goals and ideas. Just quickly, there were meetings yesterday around the state. I was on a lobby day call. There was almost 300 people basically doing Twitter storms and Twitter bombs for the legislators. And there were a lot of meetings with different legislators around the state. They continue today. So basically, we're looking for support to increase the number of sponsors to the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So I know a lot of you probably have a fair familiarity, but I am going to go through kind of the state of the Clean Energy Jobs Act. A few things have changed, and so I want to kind of go through that. And I just also do want to start by reminding everybody why we're doing this. We look at, if we do nothing, this is a familiar graph to most people, by 2100, we're going to be 4 to 6 degrees above in Celsius, above where we were in 1900. The target that's been set at the international level is 1.5 degrees here. And as we all know, this is going to lead to extreme conditions, droughts and storms and forest fires, glacial melts, coastal sea level rise, and serious biodiversity impacts and extinctions and all sorts of nasty stuff. So this is something that was put together by some climate scientists that said, if we do nothing, this is what Manhattan will look like, and there's the Statue of Liberty. And here we have when you walk out the front door every morning, this is what you're going to be doing. So what do we want to do? COP26, which was the conference of the parties, the UN Climate Change Group in 2020 in Spain. They keep reiterating the science, but they're focusing on the carbon budget. So they're trying to compare everything against how much how much carbon can the atmosphere take, and what happens if we, exceed certain goals. And this is where this 1.5 degrees number that everybody talks about, essentially it represents the potential for tipping point. So if we get beyond this and we look at the red curve here, and we can't maintain this, we're going to have these things that snowball out of control. And there's concern that there may be no turning back is the tactics that are being used. And there's a good chance there's truth in it. So what does that mean? It means that everybody on average has to cut greenhouse gas emissions in half.
I got you the next to Martha Wells.
Hello?
Motorbot.
Thank you.
Okay. So the targets are half by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And the idea is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has set this at the global level. The Biden administration has already said they're doing it at the national level. State of Illinois is looking to do it at the state level. And then this also starts being part of policy for local governments, which is actually happening as well. So hopefully we're all on the same page, and that's kind of the goal. One of the things a lot of people hear about is, this is somebody else's problem. Well, Illinois has, last year, all 102 counties in Illinois were declared agricultural disasters due to extreme weather. It's the first time that happened. There's plenty of risks to human health. As we all know, there's been heat waves, more intense storms and floods, impacts on crop yield and livestock, coastal erosion around the lakes, changing the ecosystems, which is changing the pathogens and the diseases, impacts on water, aquatic life, et cetera. So it's a serious problem. It does affect us here as well as around the world. So going into legislation, which I want to focus on tonight, is basically, I think everybody on the call is familiar with FEJA, Future Energy Jobs Act, which was passed in 2016, which provided an effective renewable energy credit program. Basically, they switched from an earlier version where it was tax driven to a ratepayer base, so it shows up in your ComEd bill. And what that allowed to do is have a predictable amount of money to support the renewable energy credit markets. Similarly, they had an energy efficiency program, which was managed through the ComEd bills. It did successfully create thousands of new jobs and training, and it had a big component of social justice. So there was low income, environmental justice, communities of color and poor were benefited through FEJA. And at the time, it was one of the most progressive climate change mitigation legislations in the US. Fortunately, the funding for the FEJA is drying up. We need to do something new. And as everybody knows, we can't wait. The other power agency who does manage the REC program said that we probably won't be able to continue until 2024 if we don't do something now. And the other big one is during the Trump years, he appointed some people to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, and they're still trying to change the electricity market rules to continue to subsidize fossil fuels, primarily coal, in Illinois by as much as 860 megawatts per year for energy, which we'll neither use nor need. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The governor is bullish on climate mitigation. So a year ago, he basically signed on to something called the United States Climate Alliance, which was something governors could do once Trump pulled out of the Paris Accord. So basically saying we as a state are behind the Paris Agreement. So now we are as a nation as well. He also he's very public about how he believes in the science, and he knows that we need to do something. In August of last year, he put out this document, Putting Consumers and Climate First. It's basically, he's got 8 principles. If anybody's interested, there's a link in here if you want to get the document, or you can Google it. At any rate, it lays out his plan, which roughly speaking kind of overlays on the Clean Energy Jobs Act somewhat consistently, but there are some nuances, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So CEJA is a 900+ page document, and I'm going to go through it in 20 minutes. So excuse me for putting a fire hose at you, but this is the way to do it, I think, at this point in time, to give people a sense. So Clean Energy Jobs Act, CEJA, the goal is clean energy, lower bills, equity, and opportunity. That's the mantra. There is a chance it will pass in the month of May this year. And we'll get into that at the end here, because there still is some level of hope that it can be done. So what is CEJA? These are sort of the 8 areas it focuses on. And as you've heard before, jobs and equity they're just woven throughout the whole document. And so the idea is, if we're going to be recreating infrastructure and renewable energy conservation, and electrification, transportation, all this stuff, at every step of the way, there's a consideration for equity and environmental justice, and it's also driving tens up to hundreds of thousands of jobs. We're also looking to get on a 100% renewable energy path. We also, as I mentioned, this capacity market that the Trump has kind of been abusing, we think we can change that, and we can actually use that to save money on our electric bills and possibly drive some of the renewable energy and energy storage markets. Also, they're incentivizing more energy efficiency, which will reduce your bills. A big one, which it's much stronger than the FEJA component, is the transition plan. So where you've got fossil fuel workers, coal mines, and coal power plants, they've got some very aggressive retraining programs and community assistance programs to help those fossil fuel workers get on a new path. Another big new one here is this is mostly about electrification, transportation, EVs and EV chargers. Another big one that's perhaps unique in Illinois is more transparency with the utilities. So as we all know, over the last couple of years, there's been some heads that have rolled and some problems of payola between Springfield and the utility. They're trying to make sure that that stuff is all out in the open so that you know, these backroom deals can no longer happen. And then just generally, in addition to going to 100% renewable energy, we want to get to carbon-free power. So this is the decarbonization portion of the act. So I'm going to go through each of these in a little more detail. So this is the renewable energy expansion. So the first thing here is, for those who might be familiar, in Fiji, there was a Solar for All program, which basically was a carve out for low income. And it basically had training programs and incentives for lower income and communities of color. So they're putting a 4X multiplier on it. And if you are a company in the business, they're going to incentivize employers. The goal here, as shown here, is, so this is 2016 and this is 2036, and you probably can't see it. This is basically what might be called the RPS curve. So, which is the renewable portfolio standard, which is the percent of power generated Illinois by renewables. So back in 2009, actually, we set a goal for 25% in 2025. We are now at, I don't know, it's under 10%. It's like maybe 8%. And so what they're trying to do is pump a lot of money in the next, you know, between now and 2025 to reach that goal of 25%. And then on top of that, they want to get to 50% by 2030 or 2031, I guess it is. So it's very aggressive. It's highly supported by, you know, pumped a lot of money into the REC program primarily. There's also the possibility, if we can do this capacity market reform, which I'll fill you in a little bit more in a second, there's a lot of money there that could be used to offset some of these incentives. So we could take it from the capacity markets and use it to support the renewable energy budget. So we're also looking to get to this 2030 mark. We're looking at 16,500 megawatts of new solar and 7,300 megawatts of new wind. That's a lot of oomph. The other thing, I would say Fiji has been good in addition to providing a lot of you know, help for people. Everybody learned a lot. And so the adjustable block program in particular, for those that don't know, it's basically, it sets different renewable energy credits for different categories of you know, investors. So the utilities will have a lower rate than a resident, and a business will have a different rate, and a low income program will have a higher rate. So they're looking at smarter ways of doing that based on what they learned during FIJA. They're also looking to revise net metering, which is the ability to basically put solar on your roof, and if you generate more power than you're using, the meter effectively turns backwards and you can get credits on your bill. And there's a number of other things. So it's basically taking Fiji and advancing it. The other big area is energy efficiency. So as we've all heard many times, if you can not use energy, it's the cheapest clean energy source. So there's another big push on to extend these targets by incentivizing the use of energy efficient appliances and other technologies, being smart about when you use your power. And so the idea is to continue a program that has been going on actually before FIJA, maybe for 10 or 12 years. It's been successful in many ways. And the idea is that by reducing energy consumption, we'll be able to reduce by $700 million a year in customer bills. Now that won't happen immediately because we're going to have to invest in the technologies to get there. But the idea is you do the efficiency improvements, those investments get paid off, and then people start saving. And we're just basically at the same time, obviously, we're reducing the carbon footprint. So we're extending the targets and the incentives to support it. They're bringing in industrial applications So larger consumers of power, if they can do more efficient things, there will be some incentives there. There were goals for the utilities, for gas appliances and the like. They're looking to triple those goals, and then it's going to be a performance based, which basically means kind of the more you can save, or the more greenhouse gas you reduce, the more the incentives are. There is very much a low income energy efficiency component, so it's a carve out for that particular set of customers. There's also something called it's a pay as you save program. And basically, you could, for example, have an energy efficiency project or appliance, and basically it will get paid for, or some portion of it. And then because you're reducing the amount of energy, that savings will be used to pay for the original investment. So it kind of gets rolled over on a monthly basis until it's paid off. The other thing, I think during FEJA, a lot of these low income opportunities, when they went into do furnace or water heater improvements or insulation, they found other issues that are related to health and safety. So they created a fund that would say if a contractor's in doing energy efficiencies and they find molds and leaks or ventilation issues in a low income home, they can get some of that funding from this program. So here, just to go into capacity market reform, I don't want to get too wonky, but basically what the capacity market is I liken it to an insurance policy. So the utility, sort of the generators, the power plants, they get paid to guarantee a certain amount of output, and they basically, it's like a 3-year insurance policy. And what it's showing here is that what they do is they base it on the peak demand. So this would be the demand. This is time on the x-axis. So what they were doing is they were paying to the to the generators, $1.8 billion in Illinois in 2018 to 2019. So basically, if you look at the average of all this, it's going to be somewhere around $900 million a year, less than the peak. So the idea is that's kind of a margin to work with. And if you add renewables and energy storage to the profile, you can actually smooth some of this stuff out. The problem is this Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which Trump had added participants, commissioners to. They basically said only coal power plants or fossil fuel power plants can benefit from this. And they're trying to exclude renewable energy. There's also a ruling that says, an earlier ruling that says states can make that determination themselves. And Illinois, if allowed, would lean towards that to say, we'll set our own capacity market rules and payment systems. But right now it's in court. It's still being battled. Hopefully it'll go that way. And if so, then this money here can be used to supply different portions of the clean energy ecosystem. So you can use it to feed the REC program or energy storage or other needs of the market. So this is a really big set of numbers, and it's a recurring annuity of $800 or $900 million a year that could be better used than subsidizing coal power plants. The other big one that's, again, I mentioned at the top is it's front and center is jobs and equity. So we're going to all this trouble to create a clean economy. It's an awesome and perfect time to help those that have been, aren't really creating the problems as much and are suffering the most, namely communities of color and poor, low income. So this whole program is to kind of give a leg up to those groups, maybe level the playing field a bit. And so they're looking at $2 billion in investment in Illinois for this low-income environmental or EJ communities through the end of the decade. And that includes something called the Clean Jobs Workforce Hubs. So they're going to basically open up to 15 job training hubs, which will be for training, solar and energy efficiency and EV charging, et cetera. Again, these will be focusing on low-income communities. Clean energy incubators. So here we have a training thing. Now we have the ability to support people who want to start up businesses, entrepreneurs. So this is again a way of helping them get their a good start. I mentioned solar for all. They're going to be pumping more money into that. So solar for low income and EJ communities. Similar thing for low income energy efficiency. So they basically want to provide more funding to get more buildings up to snuff on an energy efficiency basis. Another one here, which I like, is the community solar carve out. So I know some of you all have signed up for community solar, and it's basically subscribing to these large, like 2 megawatt solar farms somewhere out in the farm, north or west of us. This is something where you can have community organized. So you could put it, in downtown Palatine or Arlington Heights, or you could put it in a park district where residents or participants could either subscribe or even have ownership. But it's a new idea. I call it community solar, because the community solar in the past, you really couldn't do it within a community. Now you can. So I'm looking forward to seeing this work. And then on the electric vehicle side, they've got this EV Access for All, which I'll talk about in a second, but it's basically providing low income access to EVs and charging. So here we are. This is titled Beneficial Electrification in Transportation. That's what the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition categorizes it. It's beneficial electrification. The definition is if you can reduce emissions and reduce costs, that's termed beneficial electrification. So because transportation sector is now the leading source of carbon emissions, obviously it's a target area. And if we can overlay the same principle of doing it equitably, that's the goal. So again, they're looking at $50 million a year to do this. The goal is to reduce the equivalent of 1 million gasoline and diesel vehicles from the road. And again, it's a broken record, but it's really important that we're focusing on equity and public health. So what's new? This is all new because there wasn't electrification in the FEJA. So as I just mentioned, the EV Access for All. So they're providing for low-income vehicle rebates for new or for used vehicles. If you reach a certain income threshold, you can get a rebate. There's also something called last mile shuttles. So these are electric shuttles. The idea is if you're commuting and you have to take the last leg of a commute, they're going to try and come up with programs to provide electric vehicles to do that. Another one is one of the problems for the low income and communities of color is they can't afford, maybe at the beginning of this, an electric vehicle. So they're going to provide actual either third parties or municipalities to actually purchase these electric vehicles and come up with programs to share either at a low cost or for free, or maybe you can borrow it on the weekend. It'll be set up in different ways, but the whole idea is provide the ability for those who can't afford it to be able to check out EVs. The other big area, because if you think about the big trucks and buses, they're the big emitters from the diesel pollution. They've got the highest, they drive a lot, they spit out a lot of stuff. So they're looking to accelerate the adoption of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. And that's in the public transit space. So, buses, government fleets. The state of Illinois is making a commitment, if this passes, to, as they buy new if they go through purchasing cycles, they're going to buy a significant portion of electric vehicles, and then also other fleets. So there's a lot of fleets that are out there looking at electric trucks and buses. And so this will support that. And just kind of a heads up, the electric trucks are here. They're not in Illinois. They're coming. All the big truck manufacturers now have electric trucks. And there's a whole bunch of buses out there. So it's very new, but it's right in front of us. The other thing, so in the EV world, as many have probably heard, the big concern is range anxiety. And so how do we get on the other side of that? Well, it's really all about ubiquity. So you want to make sure that you have strategically located charging stations So the idea is there'll be rebates for, this can be home, business, not-for-profit, municipal, low income, specific rebates, public charging, which can be, again, something like a municipality or a third party. They're looking to outfit the interstates, the corridors in Illinois and the neighboring states with these DC fast chargers primarily. One of the things that's interesting is for participation to get a rebate, you have to participate in this beneficial electrification program, which basically means if you're going to get the benefits, you have to encourage people or set up programs to charge off peak or have rates that are attractive during off peaks. The whole idea is if we can reduce peak demand and start using power during off peak demand, that actually reduces the overall demand for power and can reduce the overall cost of power. So the idea here is you're going to be using electricity to charge vehicles, which is reducing pollution, as well as hopefully reducing costs by following some of these rules, which are going to try and influence behavior of the people charging. Another area that's interesting is something called EV owner rights. So if you live in a condominium or a apartment, there's going to be some explicit provisions that say, hey, you can go to your HOA or your apartment building owner and say, I want to put in an EV charger, and they cannot deny you. Now, there's certain restrictions, but it's definitely something that, you know, I'm actually in that business, and I run into buildings that say, we're not going to do it because we don't want to. Well, if this passes, that won't happen anymore. And tied to that is something called EV readiness. Some of you may have heard about the city of Chicago passed an EV readiness ordinance. And the concept is that if you have a certain number of parking spaces, inside or outside parking garage, a certain percentage of them have to be either ready for EV charging or have the power built into the building for EV charging. And for new construction, those are going to become rules. When you build a new building, you're going to have X percent of the spaces that are powered up or are enabled to pull wire and add a charger later. This is going to be a big one for the condominiums and the apartments, but it's also going to apply to residents. So if you build subdivisions, you may have to run like 240 volt to each garage so that the future owners can put in an EV charger. It's a whole lot easier to do it, a lot cheaper to do it when you start, when you're building. The last thing I want to cover is this whole thing about transition. So this has been a big one. They've really spent a lot of time fine tuning this. And the whole idea is, you know, if you just said we're going to do all this green stuff and you left the coal power plants and the coal mines out in the cold, it wouldn't work. It would be, you know, an uproar. Plus, it's just not the right thing to do. So the CEJA includes these three areas here. So there's something called the Energy Community Reinvestment Act within FEJA. And the whole idea is if you have a community that's going to be impacted by plant and mine closures, which has been happening and will continue to happen. And I would say after 2030, there may be no more coal power plants if this all goes forward. So the idea is that they're going to support, there's going to be property tax support for those mines. There's going to be retraining programs. Basically, you're going to try and get these coal miners and coal power plant workers to have, you know, develop a new skill set. They're also going to provide support financially and education-wise to actually help the community itself in addition to the people. And then they'll have a tax credit. So if you develop a new clean energy zone, there will be tax credits for those that do that. So part of how they're going to pay for this is they're setting up in CEJA, if you're polluting, if you're spitting out greenhouse gas from a coal power plant, there will now be fees. And there's also a coal severance tax. So when you close a mine or close a power plant, they have some formulas to say, this is the value, this is the things you must do, and you have to pay a tax when you close. So this, again, will help feed this reinvestment fund And then the idea of these, mentioned earlier, these clean energy empowerment zones, again, it's focusing on these EJ communities, but it'll be specific programs. It's much more than described here, but it's really, the idea is you're going to help the community come up with solutions themselves and facilitate it. So it's a pretty cool stuff. Question, probably a lot of you were thinking is, how do we pay for this? As I mentioned, we're going to accelerate the renewable portfolio standard. We're going from our whatever 8 or 9% up to 25, 30, and eventually 100%. Right now, we're paying for the RPS advancements on our bills, and that will continue for a few years. And the whole goal of this reforming the capacity market is that's going to pick up the slack at some point in the not too distant futures. Also, on the energy efficiency, energy usage, the program is set up that, there's going to be upfront costs, there's going to be incentives to support it, then over time, because we're improving energy efficiency, it's going to start costing less. So this kind of will pay for itself over time. As I mentioned, the capacity market, if we can direct those significant, hundreds of millions of dollars to renewables rather than fossil fuels, and also not have these coal power bailouts that have happened in the past, that money can be redirected to, solar and wind and geothermal and energy storage. I just stop real quick on that. The solar and wind, as we all know, are, they're diurnal. Obviously sun doesn't shine at night and the wind blows better at night. So it's irregular. So we need a place to store it, to even it out, to be able to manage its distribution. So as we add to the renewable component, we're going to need to add energy storage. So this is an essential part of going up the RPS level. At this point, the major utilities will be legislatively required to support and manage the RPS and the energy efficiency programs, which they've been doing under FEJA. And then in addition to this I mentioned these things before. There's going to be a polluter fee for coal and natural gas plants. There's going to be an excise tax for coal mining, and then a severance tax, as I mentioned. These fees will be used to support some of these EJ community reinvestment. So these taxes will come from the generators and go back into the communities. And as always, just want to point out that we don't do anything now, it's going to cost a whole lot more later. The other thing on the vehicle side, as many of you may be aware, there's a VW mitigation fund. Illinois was awarded $108 million, was it 2015, 2016? And they have basically said, the state has said they're going to allocate $10 million towards EV charging of that. They said that 2 years ago, and they haven't done anything. And there was also a counterpart capital bill, which was $70 million. Again, EV charging, the goal of the capital bill was to enable charging for larger vehicles and EJ communities. Again, this is a 2019 bill. They've been sitting on the funds. CEJA forces this money to be spent and for EV charging. There's also this $50 million for the beneficial electrification program. And the goal is over time, if we apply this again, to hopefully offset peak demand and such, it may actually create more savings than costs. So the $50 million in theory could be paid down over time. Also, I heard yesterday that the US DOE has announced $162 million as for basically for electrification of transportation under the super truck initiatives. This is actually the third generation of it. And some of that money could end up supporting CEJA. So this is focusing on larger vehicles, which is also included in CEJA. So a lot of cause for optimism if it passes. I'm not going to go through this, but if somebody's interested, there's a how it's paid for. This actually gets into some of the nitty gritty on the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition website. So this is more detail that we want to go through tonight, but it's here. And the other thing, I don't know if you're a a CEJA nerd like me, but if you are, this is the website. So it's the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. This is the URL, but both these links work. And it's a very comprehensive website. It has these 9 areas. And if you select on one, it actually goes to that section in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, the actual legislative text. So if you were interested in reading about the electrification stuff, you could go here and it'll direct you to those pages. If you're really a nerd, you can go to the whole full text, the 900 and some pages, and go through that. And then it also has these other things, how it's funded, and there's a webinar and whatever. So there's lots of good stuff if you really want to get into it, which I hate to say it, but I enjoy doing it. So this is a good place if you want to do some hunting around to learn what's going on. So right now, they are at the point now where they're doing a process called reconciliation. So there are other bills besides CEJA that are on the table with similar goals. The governor has a team that is trying to craft kind of their own, or to take what's in CEJA and the other bills and take the best of all worlds. There's some other bills that are focused just on, just for example, just on solar. The CEJA bill is definitely the most comprehensive. It covers all the issues of the environmental justice, all the energy efficiency, solar, wind, electrification, how it's got an interesting funding structure. It has by far and away the most support right now, but we're not over the hill. So Sierra Club has a petition that will go to your legislators and the governor. If you go to this link, which they're also down here, have had to call the governor and say support CEJA. We also recommend you call your representatives, senators, and if you go out to, you can check whether they've already sponsored for the House members here and the Senate here. This on the right is just a page snap from the House for H. Bill 804, or you can go out to SB 1718 on the Senate side. So you can find out if your legislator has sponsored it. If so, I still recommend you call them and thank them. And if not, you call them and say you wish that they would support the bill. So that's kind of what we'd like to see from anybody and everybody who believes in this bill, which it's really the best shot we have at coming up with a comprehensive, well thought out bill. This has been, I don't know, it's probably the 8th or 9th revision of it. It's really strong. So the last thing here is I want to make sure you're all on board. I want to convince you. Just stare at the screen. Actually, you probably don't have to do this to you guys at all. So that's it. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm glad to talk about this or ask. Do we want to do questions now or yeah? Does anybody have any questions? My state Senate representative tend to vote no on CEJA. Can I ask who they are? How hard are they?
Marty McLaughlin and Dan, I can't say McConaughey.
Yeah, McConaughey, yeah.
Yeah. Marty
Okay.
is strongly backed by fossil fuel and non-clean energy sources. So I don't know if there's any chance of influencing him, but I'm wondering about the other.
Well, my only advice would be to call him.
Are you talking about McConaughey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would anticipate that he will not vote on it because from what I understand, he is involved in the solar industry in some capacity. And I used to lobby him, and on energy bills, he's basically taken a pass. So unless that situation has changed, he's not going to be a yes, but he's not going to be a no either.
Well, that's fair enough, especially with the tainted involvement in energy and voting. So
Marcia,
I still think if enough people in those districts were to call, you never know what's going on. If his inclination is to not support it, or maybe he's closer to the fence, does it hurt to call and say, I would wish you would support it? Enough people do it, maybe it makes a difference. Maybe it doesn't, but if you don't try it, it won't influence it.
Marcia, were you referring to Marty McLaughlin from Barrington Hills?
That's the one.
Yeah. He claims to be a financial guy. So
Does with no credentials, but that's
right.
him.
But everything I just saw that was just presented tonight. I mean, he's actually denying the benefits. So I mean, maybe we need to go talk to him and put a financial package together and say, here's where you're wrong.
I would be more than willing to do that. I know that he declined to talk to anyone on lobby day. And
Well, that's nice.
I know that
Yeah.
I ran against Marty in the last election, so I've gotten to hear his views on this in
Yeah.
any number of endorsement settings and the League of Women Voters. So anything we can do to move the needle on maybe on the jobs aspect. Illinois lost people because, of a lot of reasons, but job opportunities can certainly play into that.
Well, one thing Peter and I could do is reach out to Sierra Club, because they, like you probably do, they track every single race in the state, and we try to be smart about where we spend our resources. So if these two are on the category of there's no hope, we can share that with you. But if they're swayable, then it could make a difference. So we keep a pretty close eye on it, because you need so many votes to get the bill to pass, and so let me find out about that. I know who your two representative senator is. I will ask.
And if the one isn't voting because of his ties to an industry sector or an energy sector, that's actually commendable. But he might still rally troops behind it, especially in those downstate communities that are most impacted by fossil fuels and the move away from them.
One of the interesting things, that the reason I showed that 3x3 matrix, so those 9 categories, the idea behind that, other than make it so you didn't have to read all 900 pages, but you could take one of those areas and go talk to somebody, a legislator, and say, whatever it is, saving money on energy or whatever, and focus on that and get them to be interested because of that. So for those that kind of sign on wholeheartedly, you don't have to do that. But for those that there may be some triggers that those subgroups might affect, that might be worth something too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I've got another question. Is there any incentive in this program or any other for municipalities to implement things like solar panels, libraries, municipal buildings, park districts, et cetera?
It's a really good question. The answer is sort of. So the problem with putting solar on municipal buildings is the franchise agreements that most municipalities have. You familiar with that?
No.
So they basically get, municipalities get their electricity paid for by ComEd in exchange for the right of way to run wires in the town. And that sounds like, oh, okay, that sounds great. And so what that means is the city doesn't get a bill. However, all that electricity is metered, and whatever that total meter is, it's allocated on a kilowatt hour basis to all the ratepayers in that town. So it does get paid for, it is monetized, but what it does also is it restricts the municipalities from net metering and signing up for RECs, because they are not officially a ratepayer. Now, there are some communities that have found ways around that. They've renegotiated as their ComEd agreements expired, which are typically 50-year runs. And there are groups in the state that are trying to find a way around it, so you can do that. Now, the other thing is, so if you have a municipality that's interested in doing this, you can set up LLCs or hire other companies that do this to actually install it, own and operate it on City Hall, if you will. And that may at some point fall under this community solar carve-out that I mentioned. So there's a lot of cities that want to do this, and they're trying to figure out a way around these franchise agreements, but it's still an obstacle. So stay tuned. And I
Would
don't
that
know
also
where, you know,
apply to, Tim, would that also apply to school districts and libraries since they don't regulate? where the
no, they're
wires are?
not. They're not on franchise agreements, so they can do it. Park districts, yeah, they're okay. School
Yeah,
districts,
so Fremd has a whole array on the top of their school.
yeah, that's a good place to put solar.
Yeah.
Hey, Tim, I know on one of your charts you showed the, kind of targeting and planning for peak capacity, but I wonder if they're planning for, the potential of massive increase in demand, especially if we go to a heavy ramp up of electric transportation. This is an issue that was brought up by actually Congressman Sean Casten when I moderated a webinar for the League of Women Voters at Palatine. And he said, if we, did a massive shift nationwide to electric transportation, our power grid can't handle it right now. So we've really got two problems. One is shifting from carbon-based utilities to, solar and et cetera, and other renewables. And the other is increasing the overall capacity.
So for the next, I'll say through 2030, unless electrification just goes crazy, we don't have an issue of generation. It's an issue of distribution. Okay. So imagine a fleet, Amazon or FedEx, and they go electric with their Class 8 trucks. Right. Those trucks, we're talking about up to 1 megawatt per charger versus, the charger in my garage is 7 kilowatts. So that's a big deal. So ComEd's involved in the discussions. These fleets are involved in discussions. The state is involved in these discussions. They're trying to figure out how to make this happen. It's a technical challenge, and it's not insurmountable. At some point, we may need this distributed generation like local solar or wind and energy storage to support these large EV charging nodes. When it comes to like homes and businesses and condos, it's less of an issue. There's typically spare capacity on the grid. The day will come where we're going to add, wires. ComEd's going to need to run more wires. Again, that's an investment. It can be done. So it's being talked about. It's being thought out. ComEd is very much, they're studying it. They have a program to get there. I think it's doable. But for now, we don't need to generate more power. I think it's a message I want. In 10 years, it may just be a question of how what we do with renewables, the storage, and how we get it into the vehicles.
Distribution, yeah. Okay.
Hey, Jed Wiener. Great to see you, Tim.
I didn't recognize you, Jed. You're okay. Haven't seen you in a while.
Great presentation. Couple of questions. First of all, supporting the act is clearly one of the takeaways from the meeting. What are 2 at most 3 other things that you most want us to remember from your presentation? This was extremely competent and appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, it's the part of the problem is where I come from. It's about reducing greenhouse gases and impacting climate. I mean, and I've started saying that more than I used to, because that used to be just a tree hugger thing. But now everybody, I think, is up to speed on it. But so, that's why we're doing it. And at the same time, we're resetting the inequities in our society. Now, again, that's something that some people, legislators might go, oh, that's important. There may be some that are less, it's less important to. So the key here is we're setting up programs that are going to be self-funded. It's going to improve the environment. So there's a business case for each of the programs I described. And, there's good outcomes socially. And we're at a point now where the grid is old. Our electric utility grid is old. We need to do something about it. This is a great time to do both, upgrade it for electrification, upgrade it for renewable energy. So all those things kind of go into why this is a good time to do it. And I was, those are some of the arguments. Who you're talking to, you might use different arguments or a different sequence.
The way you ended that leads to my next questions: arguments, points, questions to raise. Someone else very appropriately mentioned village boards, school boards, libraries. Where can we get some guidance as to the questions to ask, the points to raise at the super local level of the school district, the libraries, et cetera, to try and encourage them to be thinking about alternative energy to support their respective needs?
I'm trying to,
and not just questions, but the emotional, psychological buttons to play or to avoid.
The future of your kids and grandkids. But let me give that some thought. There's also, are you familiar? Yeah, you remember I talked at one of the things we did about the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus?
Yes.
So they're putting together a regional climate plan, which talks about all this from a climate perspective, and they're close to rolling that out in Northern Illinois. And it's going to have a lot of those things in there because it's speaking to municipalities. It's written at that level. So what does a municipality do and why? So that's one thought. There's just tons and tons of resources, but let me give it some thought too.
That's a great one. Final question for you and anyone else that might have thoughts on this. And I sent this off as a note to a few folks, I think Jeff and others, getting a lot of mailings about push ComEd aside, sign up for alternative energy, solar. How does one decide who is a reputable organization to sign up with and who should be avoided?
Are you talking about community solar or solar in general?
Community solar options. I'm trying to remember the group that
I sent Jeff
Clearway Community Solar is simply the most recent mailing that I received, and I don't know.
I've actually attended webinars for Clearway and for NextAmp, and there's another one. Go ahead, Peter.
CUB, the Citizens Utility Board, they have an excellent website, and they do compare and I think to a degree critique the various community solar programs that are being offered.
Have any of you forward-thinking people signed up with one of these groups? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Peter and I run with NextAmp, and we're having CUB on next month, so.
Yeah. I think it was Mark who I wrote to. And you still have lights on in your house? Yeah. All right, thanks.
Actually, my community solar subscription hasn't started yet, but it's gonna, like right now, it's nighttime. I would be operating off the grid, and essentially, with community solar, what you're doing is you're subscribing to an array, and they put on the grid the equivalent energy that your subscription calls for. So your energy is just going to come from the grid, but it's going to be offset by the solar energy.
Yeah, I was just being silly and facetious.
Okay.
But thank you. I will look at the CUB website.
Yeah, they actually, in response to basically your question, they created this program. you know, because you weren't the first, and you know, because it was like, you know, Next Amp and Clearway, they're out hawking their wares, and you trust them. I actually do. I think they're both good companies, but Cub did sort of a third-party impartial assessment that's useful.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
A question I had, Tim and Peter, you were going to also talk about your national initiatives. So I think we've covered the state thing to some extent, unless you want to give it some more actions to do. But what nationally is Sierra moving to, or, you know?
Yeah, I'll take over, I guess, at this point. And I've got a handful of slides to share, so let me pull that up. With the start of COVID over a year ago, Sierra Club took a very conservative approach to reacting to COVID, and we were fairly shut down as an organization. And we're still under directive of no person-to-person meetings with members or anyone else as Sierra Club into July. So that really put a damper on some of the activities that we were doing a year ago. And we're slowly trying to resurrect some of those actions. And I want to kind of get into a couple of things we're starting to work on. Now, besides our work the past year on the election and supporting races from the local races all the way up through federal, that was one activity that we were focused on in 2020. But as far as legislation was concerned, I mean, I don't think in Illinois there was much of any legislation that got through but we kept a push on CEJA, and that now continues as a priority. That's probably the biggest priority for Sierra Club is in Illinois is CEJA, and it is an excellent program. But we all know climate change goes beyond just Illinois, and as great a policy Illinois can begin to undertake, it's got to extend, you know, beyond that. Now, in Illinois, the Sierra Club Illinois, just about, I'm going to say maybe a week ago, they kicked off a new team, a federal action campaign team. Since I've been with Illinois, the Sierra Club Illinois, we've never really, as members, been asked to focus too much on federal legislation. Most of it's been very local and state. And certainly over the past 4 years, we were more fighting with our federal government than seeking ways to support and advocate. But with the change in the administration, and I think President Biden is surprising some people on the focus that he's taken towards climate and some of the very aggressive targets that he is putting forth. But ultimately, you know, he needs to be handed a bill that he can then sign. Now, so this new federal action campaign team is forming, and we're seeking individuals for every congressional district. Again, it's only a week or two old right now, so people are kind of signing up, and we're looking at do we have all of the districts covered, and I'm sure we don't. If you have any members that want to get involved with, you know, federal action, please send them our way. I'm sure we're going to need them. The activities that we're going to be focused towards, typical, you know, lobbying, petitions, maybe rallies as well. Training sessions are underway, and just to help, you know, newcomers to understand what the process is about lobbying and organizing. And we're waiting to hear what legislation they may be targeting. Now, they did happen to mention one Act, the Thrive Act. I don't know very much about it. I'll give you a quick little snapshot of it. I did push up to the team an act I felt was a little more climate orientated, which is the Clean Future Act. And I will kind of go over that. It's a massive act, but it's sort of a federal seizure. And I won't spend a lot of time on it. We know what we need to see in these types of legislation. So on the Thrive Act, it's a very large economic recovery package. When asked why aren't they just supporting the infrastructure bill that Biden is proposing, the response back, they didn't think it went far enough. I got to admit, I'm a little bit concerned about the price tag here. $1 trillion per year for 10 years. Joe Biden is having trouble with a $2.3 trillion infrastructure bill. And here comes a $10 trillion bill. So it seems to be some heavy lifting here. I think another thing that may be a challenge as well is that the recession, the pandemic recession, wasn't quite as deep and severe as it well could have been. And I mean, we could have landed in a depression, and that the jobs are returning. So I think this may be another feature that the GOP may point to, going, this is going too far. It isn't a purely climate bill by any means. It's infrastructure, it's climate, and so much more. And it's going to be introduced, fairly soon. So again, I'm just learning about it. They just proposed it, and I'm going to see just how much support they try to generate on that. Again, I'm bothered that this isn't purely a climate bill like CEJA. I think that's what we need, and don't dilute the work that we're trying to get done on the climate with other things. So we'll have to see where this goes. I think it's too pricey. I don't know what Biden's position is on this, but it's a very, very challenging. Another act, which I think might be more appropriate, it is the Clean Future Act. It's a comprehensive and ambitious act that aggressively addresses the climate crisis and greenhouse gas pollution. Again, we're going to start seeing some of the same goals as CEJA has, 50% reduction greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 100% clean economy by 2050. But here's, the pill, this cost pill, you might say, is a little easier to swallow, $565 billion over 10 years. So this one might be more achievable. And the other, I guess, challenge that we face is midterm elections. I think much like Obama, he came in to great expectation, but a couple of years later, when the midterm elections came, he kind of got slammed. He was lucky to get the Affordable Care Act through, and I think we might have to look at it much the same way. We need a meaningful climate bill at the federal level to pass in the next year or two, because we don't know what's going to happen with the midterm elections. Right now, the Democrats have the House, the Senate, and the White House. If they present a reasonable bill with but aggressive bill, and Biden has something to sign hopefully we'll see some meaningful action there. I'm going to just step through some of the key features, and again, you'll see that it's very much like CEJA. It talks to power and establishes a clean electricity standard, so that again we can be monitoring electricity generation and move towards the targets that are set. Once again, it tackles energy efficiency, as all energy bills do, and will set targets there. And in all of these cases, it does set up funding. Transportation, again, like CEJA, here's something, because again, if Illinois has a wonderful energy policy, but Indiana and Kentucky and all the other states nearby don't, what are we ultimately accomplishing? So it'd be very nice that at the federal level, we're moving out targets and standards across the nation. There's a transportation component addressing the EV infrastructure, but also moves to seaports, locomotive, and aircraft emissions as well. It addresses the super pollutants like methane, which we know is 10 times more, you might say, intense or aggressive as a greenhouse gas than CO2, as well as black carbon emission. It also begins to tackle industry and decarbonizing that sector as well. It brings in environmental justice, but it brings the environmental justice community into the decision-making process. That's where they need to be, and targets lead service lines. You may be hearing about that. In Illinois, they're trying to legislate the replacement of lead service lines, but that's a problem that's in many places, as well as air pollution, energy costs, and health risks. They tend to be the most severe in the environmental justice community, so they need to be at the table. Much like CEJA, again, we know that workers in certain industries and certain communities are going to be affected as we transition to a clean energy economy, and looks to address that. But something that many energy bills don't touch upon is waste reduction. And it introduces a suite of measures there to reduce the generation of waste and to modernize our approach to recycling and waste. And I do want to talk a little bit about this issue. Something else that a new term for me is called extended producer responsibility, and I want to define that shortly. At our group monthly meeting, I think it was earlier this month in April, we had Mary Allen from Swank. She's the Director of Education Recycling for Swank speak, and she brought up this term. It was the first time I heard it, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more and define it. It seems to be a very an important new approach to waste management that could be very effective. You know, those are a couple of federal bills that one, the Thrive Act, the Sierra Club team is starting to emphasize, and I'm certainly hoping that a more climate-specific federal act could be also brought forward that we can mobilize around. And I'll be monitoring their response on that Clean Futures Act. Now, a lot of these climate acts, they address electricity generation and transportation, as you saw in CEJA, and even the Future Energy Act, or the Clean Energy, or the Clean Futures Act. I got to get all of these straight. But you know, greenhouse gas emissions, there's other sources as well, you know, industry, agriculture, and residential. And embedded in that is waste management. And it's something a little over a year ago, one of the last things I did publicly, you might say, was to convene a meeting. It was in Arlington Heights. It was in January, to begin to put the issue of waste management, and it is a global crisis like climate. It has a direct impact on the climate, and to see if we could begin locally to mobilize some specific actions addressing waste management. That was kind of put on hold, but we're hoping to get back into that. And let me just kind of talk about waste management and climate change. You know, the whole concept of zero waste is often overlooked in many of the climate action strategies that you see. In fact, I don't know if the Illinois CEJA addresses that at all. But if you do think about our consumption patterns, you might say there's opportunities for CO2 emissions throughout the life cycle of a product, through the extraction of the raw materials, the manufacturing, then how we use it, and then how we dispose of it. So it really should be brought into our discussion, much in the same way energy efficiency and alternate transportation is talked about when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions and reducing them. Landfills are the third largest source of methane. And if we don't put our organics in a landfill producing all that methane, composting can be more of a carbon sink. So again, if we need in the next couple of decades to totally address carbon emissions, we can't be overlooking any of these strategies. Something that is happening to our waste is that it's being burned to produce energy, and of course that generates pollution and CO2 emissions. So we really need to eliminate waste as a fuel. Then the whole issue of recycling. People have different opinions about recycling. I look at it as just one step up from dumping in a landfill, because so little is really being recycled. But a lot of our materials are highly recyclable. And rather than going after virgin raw materials, we were to reuse or repurpose the materials that have already been extracted, aluminum, for example, to recycle an aluminum can. It's 95% less energy intensive. So that makes a lot of sense. The same thing with paper, except with paper, if we're using recycled paper, which again, paper is highly recyclable, it's saving raw materials, and in the case of paper, that's trees. And we certainly know the important role trees would play in the mitigation of CO2 emissions. So I guess the message there is that we want to try to bring waste management up as one of the strategies that we use in our overall climate change strategy. Now, when I was taking out my trash last night, I looked at my two containers. One was my recycle container, and one was my garbage container, the one that's heading to the landfill. And I'm, you know, when you do things right, it looks like this. And I know how I should be handling my recyclables. You know, I clean them, I dry them. I only put in that recycle bin what should be there, or what I've been told I can put in there. And you can see that, you know, about 95% of my waste is recyclable. And that all I'm really kind of designated for the landfill was one small bag, it was maybe 5 or 6 gallons of waste. But the reality is, unfortunately, and I know probably all of you treat your waste the same way, and we're trying to do the right thing, but the fact is that about less than 10% is getting recycled. And you can kind of see about 90% of our waste, even though we might sort it the way we've been told, single digit is being repurposed, and 12% of it is being incinerated for energy recovery, and ultimately most of it is just ending up in a landfill. And so it's very disturbing when, as consumers, you do things right, and it's just not getting done. And part of the reason is that there's no market for those recycled materials. And so that's why they're ending up in a landfill very often. Now, when Mary Allen presented, there was a lot of talk on plastics. And if you have looked up plastics and the recyclability, and you'll encounter statements like plastic was never invented to be used more than once. Yet a clever little recycle symbol was developed, and we find that on just about all of our plastics, leading us to think that we can put that into a recycle bin, and it's going to get hauled away and repurposed. Now, Mary Allen said basically number 1 and number 2, they are recyclable, and there are markets for that. But the rest of the plastic, there's no market for that. It's very difficult, if impossible, to recycle. It can be more energy intensive to recycle some of these things than it is to just go to virgin materials. So it's a mess. It's a crisis that's on the scale and scope of climate change, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Now, something that we're also educated on is this concept of a circular economy, where we extract raw materials, they're made into a product, the product is used, then it's disposed of, and the materials will be repurposed, and they get into this cycle, and around it goes, eliminating the need for too many raw materials and not generating too much waste. But the reality is, as I showed with that graph, that while our recycling bins are being filled, very little of that material is ultimately being repurposed. And we've got to ask ourselves, what can we do about that? I mean, we're doing what we've been asked to do, yet there doesn't seem to be a market for this recycling. The manufacturers are not asking for it. And that's where the term extended producer responsibility comes in. The concept here, and I'll give you a definition of it, but the whole idea is that producers need to have some skin in the game. And it might parallel a little bit the idea of a carbon fee. If where you have some skin in the game, and when you do, you start looking at it, and your behavior changes. But we don't, manufacturers, there is no mandate, and so when they look for materials, raw materials, they find that if it's cheaper, they're just going to buy raw materials as opposed to recycled. So the concept with extended producer responsibility is that it's a strategy to decrease the environmental impact of a product by making the manufacturer of the product responsible for the entire life cycle of the product, including the take back, recycling, and final disposal. So the nice thing about this that again, they have skin in the game, that they have to take the product back and repurpose it, or they're responsible for the disposal. So you can imagine that they will find use for it where right now they don't. Now, there are a few examples of EPR, and in some states, not all states, but electronics, paint, carpet, bottle bills are examples of that. I think if you bought tires nowadays, they may charge a couple bucks per tire. They take it back and they dispose of it. So it looks to be a concept, a strategy that puts the manufacturer, the producer, right square in the middle of dealing with waste. And when that happens, I think we will see some more and more aggressive approaches to handling waste. Now, I had not heard of this concept before. I looked up, and I find that not all states, but many states have some EPR laws. In the case of Illinois, I underlined the 3 EPR laws that they have. It concerns auto switches, electronics, and mercury thermostats. Now, there's bills in Illinois, which probably will go nowhere, a bottle bill, a styrofoam bill, and I think a carpet bill. Mary Allen is not optimistic those bills are going to go anywhere, and she saying that she feels that this EPR concept is a better approach, where you could create more of a universal or more far-reaching EPR law, and then just list various components, carpets and paints and batteries and mattresses, et cetera, items that are destined for a landfill that can't often be reused, and as well as getting products that are manufactured on the front end in such a way that it's easier for the producer to take it back and to repurpose that material. I know very often I'll get a package and I find that package is made up of plastics, and not one kind of plastic, many kinds of plastic, paper, metal, no regard for how difficult it is to separate all of those materials and repurpose and reuse them. So there's so much opportunity here to do things in a much smarter way, so that producers can stop going after virgin raw materials and truly open up markets for all of this material to be repurposed. So one thing that I'm finding is that as we talk about waste management, I get more interest from our volunteers. Now, our group is partnering with the Woods and Wetlands group, which is Lake County, on a simple campaign to address plastic use, single-use plastics in restaurants. We wanted to come up with a relatively simple campaign that's simple for people to understand and to communicate, and to begin to get our volunteers out again and active on something tangible. So over the past couple of months, been working with some people in the Woods and Wetlands group. Again, they're in Lake County, and to come up with this campaign. And it's not, we didn't invent this campaign. There is a bit of a national campaign going on called Cut Out Cutlery. And they're going after some of the big chains. They're going after some of the big delivery services out there like DoorDash and Grubhub. I don't know. And the whole concept is very simply that when someone places a takeout order, as certainly people got used to in the last year, that rather than automatically giving them straws and plastic utensils, that they opt in for that they are asked, do you want utensils? Do you want a straw? Some of the stats are that up to 90% of these utensils are just discarded. They're not even used. Now, they're not recyclable, so they will get discarded anyway, but if they were used, but if they're not even going to be used, why give them to people? So it's a pretty simple campaign, and again, we want to hand off to our volunteers and have them start to get active with that and get out and doing things again as we are starting to be able to do. So what I expect to see in the next, hopefully the next couple of weeks, is that the flyer will be completed, and we'll just begin to distribute this to interested volunteers and interested, green teams and green groups, so that they can approach restaurants that you frequent or restaurants in your area. And the message is, please modify your website and ask your customers if they want utensils, and if they don't, then don't give them, and train your staff. It's pretty much as simple as that. And the benefit to the restaurant, of course, certainly it's going to save them some time, but it's going to save them money. If 70-80% of plastic utensils are no longer distributed, I mean, that's a savings. Restaurants are on thin margins, so they can save money, they can go green, they can save time, and the numbers of single-use plastics is in the hundreds of millions. So we can begin to make a dent in that, and again engage our volunteers to become active once again. With something that they can do locally, they can do it safely, and we're also going to want to track results. So what we'll be doing in the next couple of weeks is putting information about this campaign out. We hope you'll distribute it to your members, and we will probably have like a couple of kickoff meetings where we'll explain the campaign in more detail, how to approach restaurants, and the kind of record keeping that we want to undertake, so that we can convey the impact that we're having with this campaign. And then, of course, there's so many places we can go from here. But so we're looking for people to get involved, point people that can represent their group and roll this campaign out. And I think that's about all I had.
Hey, Peter, this is Jim. How do we get more information on that restaurant program?
Yeah, Jennifer is well aware.
Oh, shit. Okay. Good.
Yeah, we have been hinting at different groups, Go Green Barrington and Cool Cities, Palatine and Arlington Heights. We have we know a lot of the groups that would be interested in a campaign like this. And so, yeah, I will be sending out this material and invites. I'm still kind of waiting to hear how we're going to kick it off. What they've been doing is working on the collateral material, essentially a simple flyer that can be just handed off to a restaurant manager, and then with a follow-up call or something like, are you doing this, and are you and we're looking for some case studies as well, where a restaurant has undertaken this and they found not only did they save money, but they got some positive feedback from their customers, basically thanking them. I kind of starting to keep an eye out myself, and when there is this opt-in to utensils, I'll say, look, I noticed it, and I thank you very much for that, and I'll tell my friends, what a good job you're doing. So, like I said, it's simple, but as we come out of this pandemic, we're also trying to seek a simple campaign where we can re-engage with our volunteers and say, here's a handful of flyers. When you go to pick up your takeout, drop it off, or if you want, just go down the street and hand it off, and then follow up. But so I thought we would have it launched by now, but it just takes some time to get some of the material together.
Thanks.
Peter, I've got a question. A long time ago in another lifetime, I worked for U.S. Food Service, one of those big corporate suppliers of all that stuff. And I wondered, has there been any reach out to those big suppliers to say, you can save your clients costs by not automatically throwing in all this stuff?
Well, I guess my first question is, do they sell plastic utensils? Are they a friend or a foe? But absolutely, we're looking for people. There's a plastics team that they just formed up in the Woods and Wetlands group. I mean, this is only a couple months old. We've only met 2 or 3 times, and we are looking for people to join us, and provide us with this kind of information, these kinds of strategies and tactics. I think when it comes to waste, it's endless, the opportunities right now, because the problem is so big. It touches everybody, but the other thing is that it's not terribly complex for people to understand, as opposed to, capacity markets and all of this. Trash, they see it, it's tangible, I get it. And when you realize, you're doing all that work of separating and cleaning, and your recyclables, or your quote unquote recyclables, only to find that it's ending up in a landfill anyway, it's very frustrating. And so we do, this is just another area where we can mobilize very, very grassroots, and ultimately, maybe the next year, have a more universal waste management legislation. I was very disappointed when the environmental community said, okay, here are the environmental priority legislation, and there wasn't a waste bill. There are waste bills out there, but there wasn't one that the environmental community grabbed hold and said, okay, we're going to champion this. So that's just another area where we can begin to raise our voice and say, much like energy and climate change has to always be out there and in front of legislators, so does waste. And waste is really part of the climate change discussion.
Yeah, Peter, I think it is for two reasons. Waste management is important. One, we're filling up landfills faster than we can handle it. But secondly, we're now at the point where I heard someone say that every day on this planet, we consume more than the earth produces. We've reached the point of overconsumption and the earth cannot replenish all we're consuming. So somehow we've got to start recycling and using less materials. We absolutely have to, it's critical. But I also would think that a lot of manufacturers are going to fight this concept of extended producer responsibility because they're going to say, well, it raises my cost. I can't afford to do that. So consumers are almost going to have to demand it.
Yeah,
in the products they buy.
Yeah, Mary Allen brought up that term for the first time, and supposedly there is an effort starting locally. Again, I'm just learning about this. Waste kind of hasn't been my an area that I spent a lot of time on. I try to do my part, but then all of a sudden you run across some of these statistics like you just mentioned, and it's like, how can I not pay more attention, and how can I participate simply, and put another finger in the dike here.
Right.
But if we're looking for something that might be very effective, then just simply here's how to recycle, and they don't have any skin in the game. And I've been noticing, more, commercials put out by Coke or whatever going, we want your bottles back, recycle. Well, is that true? And then there are powerful forces out there. I mean, as we move away from fossil fuels, they're looking to plastics as a way to offset people not buying gas for their car because we can make plastic. And I think Shell is building a huge plastic manufacturing plant. So they're looking at dumping more and more plastic. So yeah, it's quite the challenge, an opportunity, but it's hard to not have some action going in that regard. But I do find people do respond pretty positively to wanting to participate in this challenge of reducing waste. We've, in our newsletters, we've only hinted at this, and I've gotten a number of responses, which is unusual, saying, how can I help? So hopefully people will mobilize and get a little active, and we can take them to other areas, where they can help.
I think that the commercial about the recycling soft drink bottles is more a marketing pitch to say, don't worry about it, just keep buying all this stuff.
Greenwashing?
Yeah, totally.
I mean, absolutely. I think in January in Science News, there was an article about plastics, and it was, very disturbing. It basically, stated that, no plastic is really recyclable. I mean, it breaks down, and the work that they have to do to repurpose and truly recycle plastic it's energy intensive, et cetera. I mean, we should be going more back to glass. I mean, it's infinitely recyclable and maybe aluminum, things like that. But everything more and more and more to plastic. So there's a lot of work being done on it, but the manufacturers could make it simpler. I mean, there's a lot of plastic that isn't, you look at it, you go, oh, it's plastic. No, it's really made up of several different kinds of plastic, and they marry it together. Like the plastic cap could be one type of plastic, the plastic bottle could be another. And you can't really mix those up, melt them down and mix them up. They should be separated. So this is where that extended producer responsibility can come into play, and saying, just if you're going to make a plastic container, make it in such a way that it can be recycled and processed easily. So there may be a lot of common sense approaches that could be introduced initially that would have a lot of impact at minimal cost. It's just, again, there was no incentive for them to design it except what was nice and convenient for them. There's no consequence. And it's kind of just like with climate change. Go ahead and burn coal and pollute. Somebody else will clean it up. Well, you know, as we say, hey, we got to crack down. You got to clean up your act. All of a sudden, you know, alternatives start to show up. Okay.
Peter, thank you.
Are
Thank
we
you, Peter.
done? Anybody else? Any more comments from people?
Just words of appreciation for Peter. Thought it was an excellent presentation and very thought-provoking.
Well, I'm kind of in the same boat. It's pretty new to me, but I recognize the seriousness of it, and I'm just looking for some simple things that our volunteers can undertake that will have impact. So hopefully this plastic utensil thing is just so simple, yet it could reduce waste on just those items by 90%, something, you know, so that would step in the right direction.
Hey, Peter, have you heard about the Slurp program? So it's a single-use straw program. So you basically, it's similar to what you're doing. It's been done throughout the whole Go Green group. They did a big effort. The same is exactly what you're doing. They did it in a lot of restaurants in Park Ridge, and they had an approach that was very effective. If you want me to connect you with the people who did it, I'd be glad to.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking for, I'm going to be looking for volunteers, you know, to step up and take on more leadership on this issue. You know, we're kind of spread thin these days, and so I'm looking to this campaign to identify people interested in working on waste as an issue, and then from there say, great, expand it, you know, recruit more people, and have an impact. So hopefully it happens.
Sierra National starting to clue in on this, or how did you come to it, Peter?
You know, I'll be honest with you. I wasn't seeing very much from Sierra Club on this issue, and even within Illinois, we didn't have an issue team. I brought it up, and of course they turn around, you know, and say, well, go ahead, start you know, start a team. And it was like, well no, I it's not going to be a very effective team. I can't devote, but let's look within our, you know, community of volunteers here and start get something started. And yeah, so a year ago, I was just trying to put the issue out there and see who would step forward. And then a few months ago, I ran across someone in the Woods and Wetland group that started a plastics team. So I contacted her and I said, I want to hitch my wagon to you, and what you decide to do, I'll extend it into our group. Well, I'm sort of part of that leadership team right now, getting this campaign going, but I hope to be able to kind of step a little bit back, participate in it, but look for people that can take on more of a lead role in developing more strategies and rolling it out in the community. I think you'll find that there's a lot of people out there very concerned about this issue, but don't know where to begin. So hopefully this will, give them something to get started with as part of a community and part of a larger network. I mean, we hope this will go statewide, and then again bring people forward, and
I mean, the first course I had in my environmental master's program was in solid waste. And I didn't have any idea, what that was about. But we went to Swank's Bale Fill Facility and out to the Bartlett landfill and, a bunch of things like that, and it opened my eyes. But yeah.
I want to thank you all for an excellent meeting. I need to make a personal call, so it's good reconnecting with some of you and meeting others.
Jed, thanks for coming on, and thanks again, Tim and Peter, for your presentation tonight. Next month's meeting will be, we're having somebody from CUB present. So that will be May 25th, according to my calendar. So we'll be getting something out to you on that. And